All right. These last three chapters, we're going to be going through the 4 Ps of marketing, which are, it's kind of interesting. Well, last week was nothing except the product. And so these last 4 days, we're going to talk about the other 4 Ps, pricing, and we'll talk about place. And then the last thing we'll talk about is promotion, which everybody considers marketing is. But the emphasis I want to put on that is that marketing is so much more than just the advertising you see. The advertising is the end result of all of the planning that we do in marketing. And so it's not the first thing we do, it's actually the last thing. And that's kind of the way we're putting these things together. So pricing seems like one of those simple ideas that you should be able to just come up with a price. You just basically do a 50% markup. You find out what the cost is, you double the cost, and ultimately now you have how much you're going to charge for the product. And that's the way a lot of people do it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the better way, okay? We're living in a digital age where consumers are able to constantly check their prices, even at the point of purchase. We have systems where you can name your own price and have that price met. You can have products that are shipped to you free. There are so many different ways that price has been sliced and diced over the last 20, 30 years that it's hard to see where all of this comes to make some sense. And yet for each organization, the price is something that is very deeply considered. So without further ado, that's a black shirt. How much is that shirt? How much would you pay? $5? Okay. So what if you were H&M? Anybody know what H&M is, who they are? They're a Swedish retailer. My wife is Swedish, so we have a house made of IKEA and we wear everything H&M. So our daughters do. I mean, I put my foot down on some things anyway. I go as far as Walmart to get it myself. So anyway, how much would you think this shirt would be from H&M? It's a good guess. It's actually $7.90. H&M considers alternative solutions for the outsourcing of their fabrics. And so they're very, very good in the channels to be able to try to come up and drive the best price. Now, if we were to say the Gap, then you're right on the button, okay? The Gap would charge $14.90 for the same shirt. How much if it was in Armani? I actually looked this up. $275. Yes, yes. I don't shop at Armani either. I mean, that's a good, 6 months worth of clothing for me. That much. Yeah. And it's a black shirt. All right. And so the whole point of all of this exercise is that when we consider price has so much more to do with the image and the organization context than it has to do with simply the materials and the production. You would think so, but if this were an Armani t-shirt and it were $5, what would be your first thought? If it said Armani, yeah. If it said Armani and it was $5, what would your thought be? It's fake, exactly. It's the same thing going to New York and buying a Rolex for $10. Your first thought is it can't be, because the perception of quality is there. And we make those heuristics, all of us do, that price equals quality. And especially when the tag on that, designates the expectation of quality as well. Some cultures are much more risk adverse. The Asian cultures, for this to have been even 225, their implication is it's a fake. I mean, that's how price sensitive they are. Others would think of it as a bargain and try to snap it up. to understand price, you have to understand the industries in which they live in and the cultures in which they live in at all. And we're living in a changing pricing environment as well. The sharing economy has come along. We're starting to reconsider whether we actually need to own the particular things that we do. We're finding that bartering and renting sometimes is easier than anything else. So my son is coming in a couple of weeks, and I've already got an Uber set up so that it'll drive him from his place down to the airport at a certain time. So instead, there are just more flexibilities in this. But how do we understand how to price that? And so to understand price, we have to understand the environment in which prices are born in. So to understand price, we have to understand where the decisions are made. And unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever you want to think is, most companies or most small companies, the boss is the one who sets the prices. In large companies, you might find division managers or product line managers who sum up all of the total costs that are associated with it, double it, or do something like do a 20% price, 20% above cost, which is what we consider to be a reasonable rate of return. And that's how we price it. That would die in the desktop computer industry because 6% is considered the standard now. And certainly Apple doesn't live by that because their margins are anywhere from 30 to 45%. How companies should price is to understand consumer psychology. And then also recognize where their corporation is. And if we remember back to the previous chapter, we talked about products. Remember the product classification and make sure those prices are consistent in that area. What we need, or what corporations should have, is a systematic approach for setting those prices. And I should also mention adapting and changing those prices as well, because prices don't stay fixed. They can't, not in a world that changes constantly. And so what we hope to find is an understanding that consumer psychology drives your spam. I'm not going to answer. Drives our pricing. So in other words, we have to understand how consumers consider prices. And these are three of the ways in which consumers do that. Most consumers have a fairly good knowledge of price ranges. Although you can't accurately recall specific prices, consumers are very good judges on what a potential price for an item should be. We also hold within us what's called that internal reference price, this price that we consider in our own minds as what is acceptable for us to spend in order to purchase what we wish. These reference prices are what we use to determine whether the item is a bargain or whether it's an expense. Now, as I said before, we make inferences about the quality of a good depending on its price. Consumers use price as an indicator of quality. This is especially important when we come to designer clothes, expensive cars, and things that would be considered personal luxury items, such as jewelry and perfumes. Sometimes we even let these things work for themselves. So like something that is very personal to an individual would be especially those things that are beauty products. So 15 years ago, my mother, when she was still alive, and she was housebound, asked me to go or called me up and asked me to go down to Walgreens and get her brown hair color. Can you tell me how many browns there are? There was a wall of about 200 browns, all right? And here I am, as hopeless as I can be, wandering up the aisle, calling my mother, going, Mom, there's too many browns. Just grab something. I can't grab something. I don't know what you like, all right? So all of those items, of course, I bought her Preference. So Preference by L'Oreal is the most expensive hair coloring there is. And Preference had a great price quality influence. Their advertisement said the most expensive hair color in the world, because I'm one. And it sold, it was the #1 seller for I don't know how long, but it was a brilliant way of quite simply stating that the quality that you deserve, you will get every time you buy this. So that's a psychological influence. The last is price index, okay? So how do you read that? Right. Now, the interesting thing about it is price index have an extremely important way in which we measure value. Because we read from left to right, all right, we read the 5 first, and instead of implying in our own minds that this is $600, we mentally imply that it's $5.99. Now, Walmart started doing some pretty brilliant things, and they would start changing these to odd things like $5.92 and $4.80, $5.87, and they were doing all sorts of things with this because the implication is that it's even less expensive, even though it's 12 cents less. All right. The implication is left to right rather than by rounding it up. And so this is an important scenario when it comes to consumer psychology. And this is the reason why, even though if we were to ask ourselves in our own mind whether it's 600 or not, logically we would come up and say, of course it's 600 or $6, okay? But we can't stop that internal ticker in our head that is basically saying, no, it's not 600 or $6, it's $5.99, okay? So price endings, they allow us, or marketers use this as a way of the implication of a greater value, even though it's only a penny. And so basically, consumer psychology goes so deep into pricing that I could give you books that have been written on it as well. Now, there's one other thing I should have said, and I want to make sure that I also put this. One of the reasons that price is so important to study because it is the easiest of the 4 P's to change. To change promotion, other than if we are doing digital marketing or social media marketing, requires extensive redesigns of campaigns. To change the product requires a lot of industry work, doing conjoint analysis, doing so many other different things, and changing it that way. Place, and we'll talk about place either tomorrow or Wednesday, depending on how I get through this. Place is the most difficult and the most expensive to change, because our channels of distribution require negotiations. I teach marketing channels. I love the class. You know, when I got into it, channels was dying. I wanted to be in channels. This was in 2008. I couldn't find supply chain classes, so I couldn't focus on that as a minor. And then along came mobile phones, and along came the omni-channel, and the world as we know it has changed forever. And now my channel classes, I have 3 sections and they're full. And we could do a 4th, and we may have to. I don't know if they pay me enough. So, but price is the easiest. You just change the price. And because it is the easiest, it is the most dangerous to do. Now, not every decision needs to be done the way businesses do it. So I've talked about this before, and I want to talk about it again. So the Polaroid land camera was developed in 1972, 73 by Polaroid. Instamatic cameras, I don't know if you know this, but there were 2 types of cameras in the 50s and 60s and 70s. They're film cameras, and those in which you take pictures and you take the film to get it developed. And then they also had what were known as Instamatics. They were known as brownies. They were little box cameras where you had this flip up lens, and you could take a picture, pull it out, and then it would actually be the film there. You'd have to put lacquer across it to make sure that the picture's thick. Well, Polaroid, what they did was they developed a new Instamatic film, and it's stacked about 8 high, like about that big, okay? What the land camera would do, it had an automatic focus lens. This was the flash on it. It was really ingenious. It folded flat, did a wonderful job. My dad owned one of these. The difficulty with the SX70 is that Polaroid already had research which told them that consumers are most likely to buy this item at $100. Well, Polaroid priced this item originally at $250, and they could sell them. If you remember how we talked about how goods go through the economy, you got that first 2.5%, the innovators, to come in, but then you didn't get that early group to come in and buy them, quite simply because it was too expensive, all right? So they bumped around for a couple of years, and then finally, what Polaroid did was they had to get rid of their inventory, so they dropped the price down to about 100 or so, and they started selling. In the meantime, what they did was they developed what's called the Camera 100 one-step, which was actually this model, but it wasn't as fanciful. So you had about an 8-foot focus range on it. You did not have this focus. You had this already built into it. This is where you press the button. It would use the same film, but you could do, it didn't have a flash. You used a flash bar. Lucky you don't know what those are. But anyway, this was priced at $95, and it did pretty well. Could they have done better? Yes, certainly. If they would have just listened to the consumers, that quite simply, it's a great camera and a great idea, but it never got any further. Now, I just wanted to, let me lightly do this too. Let's see. Fuji, Fuji has taken the idea and made these into little business card cameras. So this does the exact same thing, uses the exact same process, but these are the things that print out are business card size. Okay, so this camera, yeah, about 80 bucks or whatever. Everything's built into it. This is like your party camera. This is the way, if you go on Amazon, you'll find them like this. So spits it out, business card size, you do parties with them, give them out, all those kind of things. So they were able to take the idea and take it what they think is just one step further. Okay. So in the reference prices, there's a couple of ideas that I want you to know. So fair price is what consumers feel like they should expect to pay. So this was the black shirt. Your expectation of paying is $5. Now, we also consider that the fair price is sometimes the last price we pay for something. But many times we live with what's called the upper bound price and the lower bound price. And these are the thresholds of where consumers consider purchases to be acceptable. What we want to see, what we hope to see, is that our purchases are somewhere near our lower bound price. But many times, especially like if we're in an auction situation, we're more than willing to accept an upper bound price, or if it's something we really want. So when I shopped for my Highlander a year and a half ago, I had an upper bound price. I did not want to go over 26,000, 27. I wanted to get a Toyota. I did not want a new model. I wanted something within the range of 2016 to 2021. I wanted to avoid the 2018s because I had read about those. They had the new 8-gear automatic transmissions that had some issues. Mostly their transmissions are bulletproof. And I nailed it on a 2017. I found one with only 30,000 miles on it, and I could get it for $26,000. So I bought it. I bought it online. Interesting thing now, and I've said this before, I put like 15,000 miles on it, but I drive a lot, and now it's worth 29,000. That's how crazy the market is. So we try to find those ways, and especially let me also say this, when there's greater risk involved in whatever we purchase, we tend to be much more rigid about how much cost we're willing to accept. So what are the steps in a successful pricing policy? We're going to do these one at a time. So we'll step through these. We first want to set the pricing objective, and that is ultimately what is our business choice in setting prices. How do we go about determining demand? How do we estimate cost? We must, of course, include our competitors. Finally, selecting a method. Selecting a final price, and what isn't here is adjusting that price afterward, and we'll talk about that at the end as well. So, what are our pricing objectives? We have basically 6 that we consider important. Survival is what it sounds like. When survival is the complete objective, your prices are set simply to be able to make it through. Usually you're plagued by overcapacity or intense competition. You might be caught where consumers no longer want your goods. And so what you try to do is set a price that ensures some kind of reasonable profit, or let's just say some kind of survivable profit that allows you to maintain your business. Maximum current profit is exactly what it sounds like. You set a price that will maximize your current profits. You estimate your demand and your costs, and you want to increase it to the cash flow to the max. And so Apple is like this. Apple looks to get the maximum amount of money out of every individual thing that they sell. When the iPads came out, they were $600, which at that point was, you were talking 2009, was somewhat outrageous. And then they did something, dropping the price after 3 months, and that really got people hot at Apple, especially the people who bought them for the first 3 months. Maximum market share means you're not out there to try to make as much money as possible. You want to capture as much or all of the market that you can. You want to take the lead in an industry, and you want to make sure that your factories are working at maximum performance. And so for you, success means keeping your business running, keeping your workers happy, and in essence, driving out your competitors by making life difficult for them when it comes to price. So this is maximum market skimming. Basically is what Apple did in the first 3 months. Market skimming means that you want to be able to get as much of the market, as much money as you can, and then drop the price to be able to maintain that constant flow. So Panasonic has been known for doing this a lot. So you buy a Panasonic product, and in 3 months, the price has dropped. Now, I'm not talking about dynamic pricing or everyday low pricing. That's done by a retail industry and not by the product corporations, okay? Product quality leadership means that you're having this unique balance so that the expectation of the item is what we would consider to be a near luxury. So you would look at items that are considered superior in their quality by such things as engineering standards. The implication is that this is a very well-built machine. So just to give you some of the ideas, survival, I think, certainly is in the desktop industry now, and I don't see that actually ever changing unless there's something substantially different in the way that they do it. I don't simply know how desktops can get out of where they're at. Maximum market share, as an example, is Texas Instruments. And it's really fascinating because TI has, from the inception of their corporation way back in the late 50s, all the way to now, has practiced maximum market share because their belief is, I want to keep that market as long as I possibly can, and I'm willing to forego profits now to ensure market share on infinitum. And I think they do a good job of it. I mean, it's fascinating with so many other things that are made overseas. Calculators still are dominated by TI and Hewlett-Packard, those two. So it works. Maximum market skimming, when the iPads came out and the iPhones did too, their process is to get as much money as they can to dip those prices down to maintain production. It's interesting, over the last couple of years, Apple has started to increasingly need the Chinese market to be able to keep up with their production. And I think, in my own mind, that market's about capped. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that, and they're going to probably have to rethink their model. And finally, product quality, spit it out there. Product quality leadership, of course, you can put B and W on that list. Although if you listen to Scotty Kilmer, he says it's ridiculous. It's the most expensive thing that you could possibly buy. Scotty says, buy it for you. Anyway, and that's what I did. Product quality leadership, quite simply, is that you're buying near luxury. So that is the pricing objectives. That's how you establish your objectives in pricing. The next is determining your demand. And so one of the important concepts in understanding that is to understand how sensitive consumers are to changes in price. And one of the most important concepts is known as the price elasticity of demand. To estimate demand curves, the best way to find out is to do research. And there is no predictor like future behavior than in studying past behavior. So if you want to know how someone's going to turn out in the future, study them in the past. All right? It's one of the best ways. Now, you can't predict life changes, but the truth is that things pretty much follow in consistency if you're a good judge of history. So what is the price elasticity of demand? It basically is how sensitive you are to changes in cost and how that affects the frequency of purchase. And so there are two sides of the same coin. It is known as the price when it is elastic, or when a good price is elastic, and when a good price is inelastic. And so consumers are less sensitive to price, or less price sensitive first when there are few or no substitutes. Now, even though we have done an outstanding job with electric vehicles, still there are many, or let's just say, we mostly use gasoline to fuel our automobiles. And even with electric vehicles, we have to purchase power eventually somewhere. So even though the price of gasoline has risen 3 times in the last 2 years, we still have to purchase gasoline to be able to get anywhere. Or most of us, I should say. All right. The sad thing about that also is it always impacts the lower income more than it does others. And that's, to me, the darn shame. I'm not happy when the price of gas drops 20 cents when it's risen by $2.50. So there are just few substitutes for that. All right. I don't readily notice the higher price because I'm lucky. All right. Oh, I'm not lucky. It's just that I have an income that can support it. I'm very slow to change my own buying habits. If I think the higher price is justified, I'm willing to pay it. And then the last thing, of course, is how much of that particular cost is part of the total cost of obtaining and operating whatever the product is. We drove in a plug-in hybrid, and my wife was like that close to one to go see one over at the dealership. Plug-in hybrids have the advantage of you can drive them 40 to 50 miles just on the electric, so that you can go around town on the highway. And then when you get out on the highway, when you're down about a quarter of the power, you're using, the internal combustion. They tend to be 4 cylinders, maybe 6. The batteries take a significant amount of room. it's a good balance. I like it. The thing, of course, is I like my big car. All right, I've gotten used to it. It's gotten used to it. So, price. If a price is elastic when a change in the price makes a significant change in demand. So if the price goes up a little bit, there is a significant lowering of demand. If the price goes down a little bit, there's a significant increase in demand. It is inelastic when a significant change of price up or down does not make a significant or no change in the demand. So what do these things look like? So these are what are known as demand curves. And this is actually, let's see, this is exactly in the middle. Okay, it's neither elastic or inelastic, because the price goes up to 50 and you can sell 60 of them. The price here 30, you sell 100. So that's like a perfect curve. All right. Now the fascinating thing is, and I forgot who the guy was who came up with this curve, but it's like a Nobel Prize winner in economics. They found that prestige products are entirely different. So in other words, there's the expectation that as prices increase, that demand increases as well. And so you get this funky concave curve that starts this way, and as you increase the price, okay, the quantity demanded goes up, and then you have somewhere in here this perfect double back curve where it curves back on itself, and it no longer is reasonable to buy. Now, you might find that you might want to be here, or you may even want to be here, because let's say your production capacity is better at 60 versus 80. Those are kinds of decisions that are made upstairs. But prestige products, instead of this curve, has this funky kind of curve that goes like that. What does it mean? You have to understand the product category to be good if you're going to be setting the price. So here's just a better way of looking at it. In an inelastic demand, this significant change in price invokes not a significant change in demand. So it's fine to increase the price of gas. Now, the fascinating thing is I'm really going to be interested to see about driving this summer, because I remember in 2009 during the recession when the gas prices went up, AAA found that we drove collectively 360 million fewer miles during the summer, which I thought, I did not think consumers would do that. We might, okay? Elastic demand makes a significant change in quantity purchased. And once again, the thing you have to understand as an organization is, what is the better place for us to sell? Are we doing better at selling 50? Are we doing better selling 150? Are we overproducing? Do we have problems with the supply chain at that level? Those are all kinds of things that we have to consider when we go about making these choices. So, once again, things that reduce the sensitivity, the product is more distinctive. Buyers are less aware of substitutes. And here's a big one. You can't easily compare the quality of the substitutes as well. If I'm looking at two different televisions, which I obsessed over, believe me, all right, many times it's not easy to tell the differences, because many times they have the same specifications other than size. So when I got tenure, I bought myself a 75-inch Samsung QLED UHD before my wife had an idea of how big it was. Okay, She said, yes. I never saw it until I brought it in. And she went, that's big. And now it's like she doesn't want anything else. She loves that thing. So anyway, it's difficult to easily compare the substitutes. Do you know how I finally had to do it? I had to go to Walmart and see it. Okay, there's a thing that we study in marketing called need to touch. All right, which means we need the visceral feel of whatever we're going to buy, regardless of whether we buy it online or not. 60% of all electronics are bought online, but 2/3 of the individuals who buy goods for over $500 go in the store and see it first. So the thought about Best Buy when people were coming in and walking out and buying them online is your customer is in the store. Don't let those people get out without buying. And Best Buy was able to solve that in many ways by doing price matching, which they finally needed to get around to doing. If I were Best Buy, I don't know why they haven't done this. Of course, you know, I'm so smart, why am I rich? I would be giving away free Wi-Fi inside of the Best Buy, and I'd be monitoring everything that everybody's browsing in the Best Buy. And I'd be popping up that in a pop-up saying, why don't you buy it now? And we'll take off the taxes. You know, I would do that. But nobody talks. So the expenditure is small. The cost is borne by another party. Nobody can tell. One of the reasons why we talk about hospital costs, but when the cost is borne by someone else, you don't care. Product is used in conjunction with other assets that you must have, which is one of the reasons why we tend to be somewhat more forgiving about the monthly cost of cell phones, because, you know, how else are you going to get it? And the product is assumed to have some kind of exclusivity. You're not willing, okay? And then, of course, you can't store the product. There's no way to store it, so you got to buy it at the moment that you purchase it. Excuse me, I'm not going to go heavy into estimating cost. I think all of us know fixed costs versus variable costs. So let me just briefly speak on this. I'm sure all of us are at Accounting 201, but variable costs are those costs that are connected directly to the factors of production. Variable costs are usually priced per unit produced. And so I have the cost of a cell phone, perhaps it's $100, and all of the costs that are associated with making that would be the variable costs. Fixed costs do not vary with production or sales revenue. You'll see these generally on balance sheets as general and administrative expense. These are expenses that just are the cost of doing business, legal fees, leasing equipment, although sometimes leasing equipment is tied to production, office space. All of those are one single whole cost because they're not connected to that. And so just remember, variable costs are priced per unit produced. Fixed cost is a total cost. And of course, I'm sure you've seen the curves and all of the other things, so I don't have to talk about, you know what a break-even point is. A break-even point is at what point you produce or sell enough items to meet all of your variable and fixed costs. So I hate target costing, but I'm going to bring it in here anyway. Target costing is where you price a good, hoping and expecting to make a desired profit margin. And so what that means is you look at an item, you give it a price, and then you fix the factors of production so that you get that price. Now, it sounds something like what Henry Ford did, but Henry Ford was looking at it in a different way. Target costing is usually for goods that are already there and the desire to make a fixed profit on it. So that item that you see there is a Plymouth, oh, I forgot the name of it. I would, let's see, what do we call it? Cruiser. That's it, the PT Cruiser. The PT Cruiser, when it came out, was a nice car, all right? It was well made, it sold good, all right? It got good reviews. It was nice inside. You could get either standard or you could get an automatic. You could get a 4 or 6 cylinder on it. It had luxury features in it. And then, is anybody in your account? Good. Those accountants got a hold of it. And they tried to make it a certain price. And what they did is they started taking away the details. They gave it roll down windows instead of automatic windows. They took away the nice stereo system and they put one of their box systems in. They took away the ABS system and some of the other things, and they reduced the quality of the good. And what happened is the PT Cruiser was out of business in 2 years after that. Okay, so I don't like target costing. I stated, I want you to see it, and I think it stinks. Okay. The second thing is that you analyze your competitors' prices, because you must take into account their pricing structures as well. Now, what you hope to do is be able to offer features at the same price that the competitors don't have, or you hope to have the same features at a price less than your competitors. And so what you hope to do is you try to have some kind of value pricing in there so that the consumer recognizes that there is greater value. And many times you can charge more. Now, the best airline I've ever flown in my life is Lufthansa. And I flew those to South Korea. And I went the other way around the world. I went from the United States to Munich and then from Munich to Seoul. And Lufthansa was just, I've never been treated that well. The food was excellent. I could have chosen an American menu or an Asian one. They had brandy afterwards. You had as many drinks as you wished. It was crazy, all right? And at that time, I was able to get a reasonable price on literally around the world ticket. And Lufthansa, if you look it up, the prices are going to be the same or similar. We chose Iceland Air to go to Sweden this time for a couple of reasons I've already talked about. One of them is I could avoid Newark, which I can't stand. And also the fact is that we changed planes in Iceland versus changing planes in Newark, all right? It also cut it up because it's about a 12-hour, everything going to Charlotte Airport, going to Newark, and then going to Stockholm. It's 12 or 13 hours. What Iceland allowed us to do is for the same price, we could stay in Iceland and lay over for up to 7 days without having to continue. And amen, we didn't go through Newark. What was also good, and I can say this, if you're planning international flights, Raleigh Airport is a nice airport. Charlotte, of course, is bigger, but trying to get back up the mountain, it only seems to be 2 hours away, but I can never get out of that traffic in 2 hours. It takes 2.5 at least. I got back from Raleigh in 2 hours and 45 minutes, and it's all interstate to get to 321, 421. It's a bargain, okay? So the last is selecting the pricing method. And so there are 3 considerations when making the choice. So mentally, in this orienting point, you have where consumers have their internal reference prices, and between those, consumers have what they consider to be a ceiling, and then what they consider to be a floor. And somewhere in that great middle is not only you, but your competitors. And so what you're hoping to do is find an orienting point somewhere up to the ceiling that contains sufficient amount of value that the consumers are fine with buying your item at that price. So IBM, the PC, is oriented at a price of, I believe, $1,500. And Compaq, with their items, was actually like $2,200. But the Compaq had a bigger hard drive, faster processors, more memory, and the consumer said, even though it was at a ceiling price, it was more than acceptable for them to buy it at that time. But what was amazing about the IBM PC, where the Apple Model 2, I think, sold 800,000 units in its lifetime, the IBM PC in the first 3 years sold 40 million units and just blew away the rest of the industry. Okay. So the consumer's assessment of whatever those unique features is where they consider the ceiling be. And then the cost, just the recovery of the cost, is where the floor price is. Okay. And somewhere in the great middle is where consumers have what's called their orienting point. All right, we're about at halfway, so let's take 10 minutes and we will come right back. I would worry about lawsuits of every kind you could possibly think of. Yeah. Okay, so you have to also know that an increasing number of customers and companies now base their pricing on the buyer's image of the product itself. And that the buildup of the perception, the perceived value, and other particular softer attributes are extremely important. And that the expectation of a certain price, as I've said before, means a great deal to many products. Rolex, all right? For those of you who choose the swatch, you're going to be hitting this particular thought as well. So Kenworth is a leader in trucks, the KWs. It's interesting. Do you know why a lot of the trucks were flat-nosed? Okay, true story. So trucks at one point were limited in the total length that an entire truck could be with cab, all right? So it meant that if you had a truck with a big nose on the front, you actually lost that amount in terms of storage that you could have in the back. So they make trucks with that flat face on. If you go into Europe, you'll see them all over the place. But in the United States, they threw that out and maintained certain maximum sizes for what they're drawing behind them versus what's drawing them. So just thought you'd like to know that. So one of the interesting things that has come out of Walmart, if you remember their earlier things that they would talk about, Walmart is always knocking down prices. Walmart came up with a concept of everyday low pricing. And it is what's known as a value pricing. So they look to have a fairly low price for a high value offering. That's what a value price is. But what EDLP says is that pricing is going to be dynamic. And so one of the things that, if you notice, went away in the 90s, other than in certain locations, is that at large stores, they no longer affix a price to the given item that you wish to purchase. And there's a reason for that. Instead, what they do is they have little stickers that are in front, and that has the price. Why? Because what everyday low pricing means is that the price is adjusted almost daily. And it's adjusted by price and demand. You basically no longer advertise prices, but in essence, what you do is you change the price constantly. And so that's what everyday low pricing is. It is a constant low price, little or no price promotion. It eliminates the week-to-week uncertainty that you have with promotions, because there are no more promotions for price. So it means that consumers are not laying back to wait for those prices to drop, except of course for Black Friday and special events. EDLP has been a really good game changer in many ways. It means that retailers do not fixate on price with everything. It allows the prices to adjust themselves or fluctuate depending on the cost. And it also assures the consumer that whatever day of the week that they go in, they'll get the best bargain that they can. And it works well. And they stop advertising price. So there are two other methods that we're going to talk about in the pricing method, or one other method actually. And one of them is known as the English method, in which is the ascending. And another is which known as the Dutch, which is descending. So English auctions have one seller and many buyers. The seller puts an item up for bid, and the bidders raise the offer prices until the top price is reached or a time is eliminated. I did a study of eBay back in 2009, and eBay was closing 16 million auctions every second at one point. And I mean, just think about the computers that it takes to do that. I mean, it's just awesome, amazing, all right? The Dutch, which is descending, is maybe one seller and many buyers, or it could be one buyer and many sellers, all right? The buyer announces something that they want to buy, and the sellers descend the price to the point where it's the lowest you can go, and then the buyer buys at that price. So has anyone seen, not Storage Wars, but the
American Pickers?
Not American Pickers, but the Delivery Wars, the guys that drive stuff around. Okay, so there's one of them that works with drivers where they'll take a good anywhere from the United States from here to here, okay? And that's a descending or Dutch bid, all right? So what it means is it says, I've got to move this big giant piece of equipment, and the bidding would start at like $10,000. And the shipping wars, that's it, shipping wars. And the shippers would go down lower and lower in price until the other shippers would say, I can't ship for that price, it's all yours. That's an example, all right? That's a descending one. The difficulty, of course, with shipping wars or shippers is whether or not you're able to successfully cover the costs. And the other part of that is it reliable, all right? Sometimes, you know, you don't receive the value that you hope to get. And then finally, sealed bid auctions are exactly what it sounds like. These are especially with government contracts. Usually what they are is their specifications and they're given on sealed bids, and the bids have to meet a certain price. Now, there are ways around this. When I worked in the 80s, there was LSU at Eunice wanted to put together a computer lab of 50 machines. And boy, that was a nice check, let me tell you, commission. But the way that they wanted to do it is they really wanted to work with me, but they had to put it out on sealed bid. So we put together a set of specifications and put in exact things that individuals had to have in their machines, and nobody can match the price. And I got it. And it was nice when I got that check. Okay. So these are auction type prices, English, Dutch, and sealed bid.
You heard of auctions where the second highest bid wins?
No, never have.
No, we talked about it some in economics.
Really?
Yeah.
Because you figure that the second highest bid is going to, or excuse me, the lowest bid, second lowest or second highest?
Second high, like the person who bid the highest wins, but they pay the second highest price.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that.
And then it can even go down to the third high. I mean, it's like,
Wow, that's a lot of control on the buyer. I mean, to be able to do that, or the seller has to accept it for what it is. What is it used for? Mostly government work? Or?
I don't know. I'll have to look into it more.
Yeah, I'd be really interested
Yeah.
to hear that, because yeah, I mean, usually in bid systems, it's winner take all, but there must be some unique rules. I'd like to hear about that one. So the last part is you come up with a final price, and you got to come up and still think of what the impact is going to be on your competitors. Is your competitors' first move to match your prices? Will it impact other products in your product line? And this happened with Apple to their detriment, because the pricing structure at one time was such that you were actually able to spend the same amount for a better item, and people moved away from the better item, and it hurt themselves. It also, you might have to wonder whether or not there is a substantial risk in accepting a price going into yours, all right? Anybody who has watched Apollo 13, this is actually a true quote by Gene Kranz. He said he worried about the fact that this was built by the lowest bidder. And yeah, I get it, all right? So finally selecting that last item is basically, what is the impact on consumers and how, or whether or not it'll be susceptible to that, all right? Now, along with you setting a price, you may have to change the price as well. And the only one I'm really going to talk about is many times there are geographic differences that have to do with where a consumer is buying a particular item. Would you rather purchase a Coke at a convenience store or inside the airport? Yeah, exactly. And many times those, once again, remember, pricing in elasticity, spit it out, has to do with whether or not there's any substitutable products. So geographic pricing makes a substantial difference. So I'm not going to worry about this, but let me talk about promotional pricing for just a second, okay? Promotional pricing is used to stimulate a purchase within a fixed time frame. Any sales promotion is the same way, but promotional pricing is built around reducing the price so that consumers will buy a fixed amount within a given space. So the Pizza Hut is just about to open, and I'm sure they're going to come out with promotional pricing. And the reason why, of course, is to spur demand. Now, one of the things that we actually know in marketing research is that promotional pricing does not change brand loyalty. As much as we would try to think that way, consumers, once the promotion ends, return to the brands that they've always been loyal with. Now, there are other ways of promotionally pricing goods, and one of those is known as a cash rebate. So rebates started in around 1982, 1983 with Chrysler. When Chrysler was coming out with their K cars, they wanted to find a way to spur consumers to buy Chryslers. And they're the ones who started the first cash rebate. So what was the rebate? The rebate was that if you bought a Chrysler car, you would get a check for $700. Now, you got that after the purchase of the item. They have been very flexible with the way rebates happen. You can now apply the rebates to the purchase of an item, but generally rebates happen afterwards. We know rebates are good because only 1 out of 3 individuals actually go through the paperwork of getting a rebate. And so rebates spur consumers, but they don't necessarily go through the work to get them. I did, all right? When I was selling computers, we actually filled out all the paperwork for our customers because we wanted them to have that rebate. And it was involved, and we made sure to spend time doing it, but we got loyal customers that way, okay? So some of the other ways you can do it is you can do low interest financing, you can stretch out payment terms, you can add warranties and service contracts. So this is what Lexus did the first years it came out. And then last is that you can do psychological discounting, which is you set an artificially high price and then you offer that product at a substantial savings. So, you know, you start out was $359, now $299. I was looking at gazebos at Big Lots, and of course they're all gone because they've gone through substantial discounts. And that was my fault because I was in Iceland, so I couldn't get them. But those are ways that you adapt. I'm not going to worry much about price discrimination. That's not going to be what I care about. But I want to talk about initiating price changes. There are many times when you must initiate price cuts. You're producing at capacity. It is in the best interest of your corporation to continue to produce at capacity. And so the simplest way that you can do it is you cut price. You anticipate to have a new competitor coming in, and that competitor is going to be someone with big shoulders that's going to be difficult. And so you will drop your prices to be able to maintain the consumer base that you still have. But folks, I've talked about this, and it's important to understand that price cutting start or create their own traps, all right? And that you have to avoid them if you can. Price has to be your last choice when coming up with new ideas to maintain. I would much prefer increasing service if I could, or giving additions away along with a given item. Because once you fall into the price of cutting prices, you fall into these. The first one is that the assumption is that the product is low quality. And as I said before about price cutting, low prices may buy market share, but they're not going to buy customer loyalty. And if the goods that consumers are loyal to drop their price as well, they'll go back to their other item. And that's what the fragile market share means, okay? You might have higher price competitors that can match your lower prices, but they have longer staying power than you do. They have deep pockets and you have shallow ones. And then finally, your competitors might respond by lowering their prices below yours and starting a price war. Now, having said that, I don't know, but if you know this, but many salespeople are willing to give price concessions to you when you go in. Many times we don't ask for it. I used to work for Con Appliances when I was in Lafayette. There's one in Gastonia, I noticed. But one of the things at Con Appliances is there was a little item on each price on every good that we had that told us how much we could lower the price by. And so if we felt like we had a sale, we could reduce the item by $25, maybe $50, and use that as a spur. However, consumers are much smarter. Not just much smarter, but they're much more savvy now. And that the willingness to give price concessions means that you're having to give price concessions every time you sell something. And so that's another one of the difficulties. It's just the problem is that when you fiddle around with price, you're fiddling around with much more than just the cost of a piece of equipment. You're fiddling around with the value of whatever those consumers desire. And then the last thing, no, not the last. However, you may have to have price increases. There comes times when, especially now, when inflation's at 9%, where you quite simply have to have prices increase. Well, there's ways that you can do that are built in that aren't necessarily kind, but you may have to do. All right. One of them is a delayed quotation in which the company doesn't set a final price until the product is finished or delivered. Anybody who's had someone work on their bathroom knows everything about this. I wanted a bathroom. I didn't want it made out of gold. Inflation or escalator clauses are in every contract. And so my father in the late 70s had bought a 20-acre piece of property in Mississippi and had a variable rate loan. Worst mistake he ever made. And when inflation went up to 20%, inflation went to 12%, his loan went to 20 and he had to sell it. One of the other ways is that you unbundle things and that you price items individually one at a time so that the overall price gets lost, all right? In pricing, we tend to look at price increases individually and look at decreases all as one. And then finally, what we can do is just simply reduce the discounts, which are not any fun. And so just to end this, just to let you know, here's the issues with price. Price has to be taken with as much consideration as all of the other 4 Ps. So if any of you are working on any of the cases that have to do with price, the forewarning is is that you take the same amount of thought that you would do with price as you would do with any of the other 4 Ps. Okay, we're done. We will work tomorrow on place. I think it'll take 2 days for place, and then finally we'll wrap up with promotion.
We really know our cases.